Hey guys, welcome back. Today's story is going to be another classic, Cinderella. Doesn't look like the Cinderella you usually see, but I have the other type also. Look, this Cinderella is all dressed up and fancy. So I'm going to read this Cinderella, and it is retold by Barbara Carlin, illustrated by James Marshall. What do you think retold means? Re means to do what? To do again or to tell again. So this story is being told again by Barbara Carlin. And usually when they retell a story, they change a few things in the story to make it a little different. Okay, here we go. Cinderella. Once there was a widower with a kind and beautiful daughter. Life was sweet in their simple cottage until the widower decided to remarry. What does a widower mean? So, a widower means if someone has passed away, maybe they've had a husband or a wife, their other has passed away, so that means they're without the other. So that means the dad is remarrying. He's finding a new wife. Not knowing the ways of the world, he married a vain and horrid woman whose two daughters were as vain as horrid as she. What a stupid little house, they said. Look at the sisters. And there's Cinderella. And there was some big words right there. What does vain mean? What do you think vain means? A vain and horrid woman. Does that mean she's pretty pleasant or nice to be around? I don't think so. The two widowers' daughter was made to work like a servant in her own house. She was soon run ragged, washing, ironing, scrubbing, dusting, and cooking heaps of food. The poor girl no longer had a bed of her own and had to sleep among the ashes and cinders. And from that time on, they called her Cinderella. Okay, here's some more big words here. It says scrubbing, dusting, and cooking heaps of food. What do you think a heap of food is? You think it's a little bit of food or a lot of food? And here's another one. This is how she was called Cinderella. It said the poor girl no longer had a bed of her own. She had to sleep among the ashes and cinders. And from that time on, they called her Cinderella. So where she was cleaning up by the fireplace, she got ashes and cinder on her, which are the ashes. So they end up calling her Cinderella. She is pretty dusty. Now it happened that the king of the land had a handsome son. The king's greatest desire was to see his son married. He decided to give a ball and invite all the fair maidens to he decided to give a ball and invite all the fair maidens of the realm. So the realm is just where they are, where they live. Okay, so the king is having a ball. When the king's messenger delivered the royal invitation, the dreadful stepsisters were overjoyed. Each was convinced that she would win the prince's favor. On the day of the ball, Cinderella was exhausted from trying to make her stepsisters look beautiful. Wouldn't you like to go to the ball? They said, teasing her cruelly. Oh, yes, said Cinderella. Don't be ridiculous, cried the stepsisters. What would a wretched mouse like you do at a fancy ball? And they shrieked with laughter. Are they nice? I would not want to be around them. And here's some words. Cinderella was exhausted. What does exhausted mean? She was exhausted from trying to make her stepsisters look beautiful. You think she was tired? She was wide awake? How did she feel? Here's another one. Don't be ridiculous, cried the stepsisters. What would a wretched mouse like you do at a fancy ball? Wretched mouse. What are they comparing her to? And they shrieked with laughter. What do you think shrieked means? Shriek means, and they shrieked with laughter. Thinking themselves be beautiful beyond words, the stepsisters left for the ball. Don't be a lazy bones while we're away, they said to Cinderella, and think about all the fun we'll be having. After her stepsisters had gone, Cinderella went about her chores. As she worked, she wept bitterly. You look so miserable, child, said the kind voice. Who do you think's speaking? Who are you? Said Cinderella. Look who it is. I, replied the plump little woman, am your fairy godmother. Please tell me why you are crying. I want so much to go to the ball, said Cinderella. That should not be too difficult to arrange, said the fairy godmother. But you must do as I say. First, fetch me a nice big pumpkin from the garden. What does it mean to fetch? So Cinderella's going to go do what? Cinderella brought the biggest pumpkin she could find. Now, said the fairy godmother, I will require 6 white mice and a fine fat rat. Cinderella brought them live from the trap. And finally, said the fairy godmother, I must have 2 lizards. You might look behind the watering pail. Cinderella did as she was told. What does it mean to require? I will require 6 white mice. Require. So what do you think she's doing with all those things? She is a fairy godmother, so she's probably doing something fancy. With a touch of her wand, the fairy godmother changed the pumpkin into a magnificent golden coach, the mice into 6 white horses, the rat into a jolly coachman, and the lizards into 2 sleek footmen. Lovely, the fairy godmother exclaimed. Off you go. Am I to go in rags? Said Cinderella. Silly me, said the fairy godmother, as she transformed Cinderella's filthy rags into an elegant gown and on her feet placed a pair of sparkling glass slippers. Now you are ready, said the fairy godmother. But remember this, you must return home before the stroke of midnight, for then all your finery will change back to what it was. Cinderella promised to obey, and then she was off to the ball. Here she is. She is looking nice and ready. At the palace, the prince learned that an enchanting maiden had arrived, and he greeted her himself. The other guests were puzzled. Who was this beautiful stranger? Who was it? Completely smitten, the prince had eyes only for Cinderella. They danced every dance. Cinderella found herself deeply in love. She was so happy that she took no notice of the hour. Suddenly, the clock began to strike 12. Look who's looking out on the balcony at Cinderella. Stepsisters. And it said the prince was completely smitten. The prince had eyes only for Cinderella. So what does it mean he's smitten? Look at him, he's smiling. You think he likes her a lot? Remembering the warning, Cinderella ran from the prince's arms, out of the ballroom, and down the steps of the palace. In her haste, she lost one of her glass slippers. Wait, wait, cried the prince. I don't know your name. Cinderella's golden coach sped away from the palace, but at the stroke of 12, the fairy godmother's warning came true. The coach was changed back into a pumpkin, the horses back into mice, the coachman back into a rat, and the footmen back into lizards. Cinderella was once again dressed in rags. Luckily, she left the ball in time, right? Because that would have been kind of embarrassing being at the fancy ball dressed like that. Discovering the tiny glass slipper, the prince vowed to find and marry the beautiful stranger. He traveled the kingdom far and wide, trying the slipper on every maiden's foot, but it fit no one. Finally, he arrived at Cinderella's house. "Me first," cried the elder stepsister. What does it mean to be an elder? Is she the youngest or the oldest? Extending her long, skinny foot, but she could manage to get only her toes into the slipper. "My turn," cried the younger stepsister, thrusting her pudgy foot at the prince. What does it mean to thrust? Is she just sitting it, or she's throwing her foot? She pushing her foot in his face? What is she doing? She pushed and shoved, grunted and groaned, but the slipper would not fit. "May I try it on?" said Cinderella, stepping out of the shadows. The glass slipper fit perfectly on Cinderella's tiny foot. "I have found my princess," cried the prince. "We shall wed tomorrow." On that festive day, the kingdom rejoiced. Generous and forgiving, Cinderella moved her family into the palace and found a lord of the court for each of her stepsisters to marry. So even though the stepsisters were mean to Cinderella, she still found them handsome men to marry and moved them into the palace. It said generous and forgiving. She was a really nice person, even though they treated her mean. Cinderella's fairy godmother moved in too, just to make sure everyone lived happily ever after. The end. So that story pretty much kept to the original, Cinderella. Okay, guys, so now I want you to write your own story. I need at least 5 sentences. Or if you're 3rd or 4th grade, I need you to write up to at least 2 paragraphs of a story about a character. A once upon a time character, that something special happens to them. Like a Cinderella story. Instead of her name being Cinderella, her name can be Candy Cane Sally. And she goes to a special candy land and she meets who at the end of the story? Who does she meet? Candy cane? When do you see a lot of candy canes? There's a holiday that we see a lot of candy canes. Okay, so that should be her name. Or it could be about a prince. Maybe a prince is being mistreated. So I need you to write a story about a character in the once upon a time. So you can start your story. Once upon a time, there was a prince named Paul, and Paul was in search of the finest horse in the land. So he wasn't even in search of a lady. He was in search of a horse. Maybe that's what he liked to do. That was his hobby. So just write a story about a fairy tale. Okay? See ya.